are talking about a campaign that really caught our attention over the holiday break, where a mum really wants to improve toilet facilities for disabled people and has put together one of the most extraordinary advent calendars you will ever see. We're going to meet her in just a moment and hear about her experiences. Meanwhile, we are about to meet Sarah Brisdian. She's a mum of twins, and she's on a mission. As I mentioned earlier, one of her children, Hadley, has cerebral palsy, and Sarah is so fed up of the condition of the disabled toilets that they're forced to use that she's been campaigning to improve things. Specifically, she was tired of laying her 7-year-old son on dirty toilet floors when he needed changing. She says there simply aren't enough accessible toilets which have adult changing benches and hoists. As a result, as she puts it, Hadley is faced with the undignified, unsanitary and heartbreaking situation of lying on urine-soaked toilet floors because standard disabled toilets simply do not meet his needs. In the run-up to Christmas, Sarah did what she called a Lou Advent calendar. Every day during Advent, she took a tasteful photo of herself on the toilet and posted it to social media with a caption which explained her course. It was very difficult to miss these particular postings, and they captured people's attention. They captured ours. Maybe you know exactly what Sarah's talking about because you too have to change your disabled son, daughter or partner on a regular basis when you're out and about, and the facilities just aren't good enough. The loos may well be there now, but we've moved on from that. They are not up to spec, or they're simply not clean. 08000 288 291. Email vine@bbc.co.uk. Sarah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jeremy.
So tell us about Hadley and the challenges you face.
So Hadley's disabled. He's a full-time wheelchair user. And in order to help him access the toilet, I have to lay him down to take off his trousers and his underwear before I can get him onto the toilet, because he has cerebral palsy, which means he can't stand unaided and he can't access the toilet the way you or I do. And most of the time, that will mean laying him on a toilet floor to actually remove his clothes, because the equipment needed isn't in a standard accessible toilet.
And so ideally, you'd have him on a raised surface like a bench of some kind, is that right?
Yeah, so the kinds of equipment we need is an adult-sized changing bench. That's usually height adjustable so that you can get it exactly where you need it to position the person you're changing. And obviously it keeps them off the floor, which is covered in thousands of germs and goodness knows what else.
Because you've had some really bad experiences, is that right?
Horrendous experiences. I mean, we've had to resort to using the boot of the car on many occasions because the toilet floor is just so awful, we can't even risk it.
And you're, forgive me for asking for the details, but you're basically taking his trousers off to help him get onto the loo, is that right?
Yes, so until recently, Hadley was still wearing nappies because his continence is affected by his disability. But lately, he's able to use the toilet. So although he's not necessarily wearing a nappy, I still have to lay him down in order to remove his clothes because he can't stand. And I can't hold him up, remove his clothes and get him onto a toilet. I have to do that laying down.
And also as he gets older, it gets harder, I guess, for you.
Absolutely. He's getting too heavy for me to lift from a wheelchair to a toilet floor now anyway. So even if I wanted to lie him on the floor now, it's really painful for him and me. And
worst toilet in your experience? Do you have a number one?
Yeah, supermarket toilets have been my number one worst, really. We quite often go to the local supermarket for various bits and pieces. I don't particularly like taking the children, but you have to sometimes, and they tend to be dreadful. I mean, I've walked out and had to take him home and let him wait until he gets home before, because it's so disgusting.
And really to do with the fact that if you have to lie him down, he has to go on the floor, and the floor can be horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't know if that's water or wee, and it can be worse. So, unless I carry an entire bag full of disinfectant and everything I need to clean up that floor, which I do to some extent, sometimes it's just not possible.
So you bring a mop with you or something?
I have to take lots of Dettol.
Wow.
Lots of, not just a changing bag, but I have to take things in there to clean the floor, but then also to put those items that I've used to clean the floor away in my bag.
One unintended consequence of the change of the law on disabled facilities seems to be that lots and lots more places have them now, which may be good, but there are lots of places that say, OK, if we're going to have a toilet for disabled people, that'll be our only loo.
Yeah.
So it then becomes everybody's loo. And by the time you get to it, it is in a bad state.
Absolutely. And if you
Particularly if it's raining and people are trapped in the weather as well.
Yeah, particularly this weather, over Christmas it's been horrendous.
Yeah.
And you're walking into a toilet. Most people probably don't pay any attention to the amount of water and other things on the floor. But the first thing we see is a floor that there's no way we can lay a disabled child on. It's disgusting.
And in order to lay Hadley on the bench, you would have to have a hoist as well, would you? Or maybe that's a bit later in his life.
Yeah, I mean, if his carer was doing it, they would probably use the hoist. For us, we're able to do a standing transfer from his wheelchair. So we need to lower the changing table down to the right level to meet his wheelchair so that we can transfer him safely across, then lay him down, remove his clothes, then again transfer him back to the wheelchair and across to the toilet.
So tell us about the advent calendar that caught everyone's attention.
Yeah, so I rather crazily decided to just try and break a bit of the stigma of going to the toilet. We don't like talking about poo and wee and periods. That's another big issue for disabled women. And I just thought, we all have to do it. We all have to pee. So why is it so hard for us to talk about that? And I think that's why we find it hard as campaigners to get people to talk about it. It's not sexy, but it's such an everyday thing, and we need to talk about it more. It might really help.
And the pictures were, 12 pictures of you on the loo in a tasteful way?
Yes, I know. I was very careful to preserve my dignity,
You did.
obviously. But that was the point. I tried to make it Christmassy. It was supposed to be a bit of fun as well as try to raise awareness. I've got various costumes, from a Christmas present to a Christmas pudding, Santa, you name it. But the whole point was, disabled people have their dignity stripped away from them when they're accessing the toilet a lot of the time. I could take that photo and do what I like with it. That's my choice. But my son has his dignity taken away from him, and that's not his choice.
And you are on Twitter. You are at Saz Brisdion.
Yeah.
SAZBRISDION. Saz Brisdion. So that people can see the advent calendar there if they want to.
Absolutely.
And give you a word of support or whatever. I just wonder if anyone who can change things has got in touch and said that they will. Or is it too early?
Sadly, not yet. But I'm really hopeful. It's been great. It's reached a much bigger audience, I think, than I'd ever hoped. So I'm really hoping that some CEOs who've got some clout about them, who actually could make a difference in some businesses, might be listening or might have seen the calendar. I think it only takes one person to go ahead and say, do you know what, this isn't right, and we need to commit to putting these in, and then hopefully the ball will start rolling a bit faster.
And the cost per toilet?
Can be anything from a few £1,000s to maybe £20,000, depending on what you're doing and what your facility already has.
What about your daughter Erica, who is Hadley's twin? Does she pitch in with this, and what's it like for her?
It's hard for her because she knows nothing different. Obviously, she's grown up with Hadley and knowing what he has to go through, but she misses out on the same things that he does. The places that we can't go to because there's no toilet for Hadley, she can't go to either, or we have to take her separately. And then she misses Hadley and wants him to be with her. They're twins. They've still got a very close bond. They're only 7. There's time for that to change. But she, her life is massively restricted as well. We have to plan everything we do around, is there a toilet that Hadley can use? And if there isn't, where is the nearest one?
And you had a pizza experience recently, did you?
Yeah, unfortunately, last night we were in our local, my nan's local Italian restaurant, and there wasn't even your standard accessible toilet on the ground floor.
You'd given them a ring before as well.
I'd booked in advance. It was my nan's Christmas present. I'd let them know that there would be 2 disabled people in the party, my son and my nan. And nobody thought to mention that there isn't actually a disabled toilet. So we had to carry Hadley up a flight of stairs to use the average gents' toilet upstairs. My nan had to hold it in till she got home.
Thank you very much, Sarah Brisdion, mum of Hadley, with a campaign which everyone has noticed. The Lou Advent Calendar. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
No, that's not the first time I've said all those names. Not all of them. It's called Burmese. New record. Right, we're talking about the state of disabled toilets. Yes, there are now loos for disabled people, and that is good. They're in lots of places. However, we just heard from Sarah Brisdion, who's the mum of Hadley, about the fact that her son has cerebral palsy. He's 7 years old, has to be changed on the floor by Sarah, and the floor is not a good place in lots of these loos, so she'd like a bench in them. And is that too much to ask for? Jackie emails and says, my sister has MS and she's totally wheelchair dependent. We often find disabled toilets in a very poor condition, wet floors, full of cleaning products, products or blocked by high chairs and buggies. They're often unsafe with grab rails hanging off the walls. You often can't get close enough to the hand dryer or the sink in a wheelchair. The whole facility is put behind heavy double doors that someone in a wheelchair can't manage alone. I would say these toilets are all designed by people who've never experienced life in a wheelchair. Isn't it interesting that the business of getting disabled toilets, as they're often called, was the first step only, and now it turns out a lot of them are not satisfactory. Gillian Scotford in Chesterfield. Now, you lost your son in February, Gillian.
I did, that's right, yes. Thomas was my son. He was 21 years old, and for the 21 years I'd spent my whole life caring for Tom. And he'd got severe brain damage, so wherever we went, we had to have suitable facilities. And unfortunately, accessible toilets with ceiling track hoists and adult-sized benches are just not what people. It's not a familiar thing to people, and I think that there's a lot of technologies that save people, and people come out of hospital with a lot of disabilities and brain injuries and motor neurone disease, and you only have to look at children in need and you see all these children in hospices and they can't actually walk, and you think to yourself, I really want to help those. I want to help them have a better life. And one of the biggest things is actually a toilet, because we all want to go out, but without those facilities that we can actually care for our children, because they're not babies anymore, we find everyday life a real struggle.
So how interesting that, in a way, the most helpful thing a person with a profound disability can have is a toilet that they can actually use.
Well, we all need to go to the toilet, and we all need to have a life. And a life is not stuck in a front room, where you can't go out and socialise. So if someone goes to a wedding and they've got a severe disability, then someone has to maybe go home, sort of leave the party early and go back home, instead of being able to enjoy a full day out, what everyone else takes for granted. And I know when Tom died in February, of course it's just devastating, but I actually don't have to navigate my life around toilets and facilities. But what I have done, and my friend Jane, her daughter has got severe disabilities, and we set up a charity called Accessible Derbyshire.
Right.
And we set that up about 4 years ago. And in Derbyshire, we've actually got 25 changing places toilets, which until not long ago, and I don't know if it still stands, but there was more toilets in Derbyshire than there were in the rest of the world outside the UK.
How interesting. Thank you, Gillian, very much. And condolences on the death of your son as well. Michael from Beverley says you wouldn't change a baby or an old person on the floor. So why do young people with disabilities have to suffer this indignity? I've got a 9-year-old girl who regularly has to be laid on a cold, urine-splattered floor to change her nappy because there are no facilities like a changing bed or platform, so this can be done with dignity. It's disgraceful. We need legislation to guarantee all disabled facilities provide space for a changing platform. That's it. That's basically what it's about. A bench that attaches to the wall that maybe has the ability to change its height. Tracy Finch Wright in Warwick. Your son is 18.
Yes, he's nearly 18. He's 18 in February.
Right, and disabled since he was 6 years old.
Yes, he suffered a heart attack when he was 6. It's left him severely brain injured with lots of medical complex.
Oh, goodness.
So he's joining in. And I think one of the things that I realised, I wanted to carry on and do as many things as we could do before his disability, but, acknowledging that there was a big problem. But because he was only 6, he was 20 kilos then, I could scoop him out of his wheelchair, put him on a toddler changing bay. I had, in towns where I used to go, I used to know where there was mother cares or there was baby changing facilities where I could lay him out, often with his feet dangling in sinks, with people looking on, other young toddlers making comments. But, it was the only way that we could get out and have some sort of normal life and try and carry on. And I had spoken to one of our local councils in Stratford, and the guy was just very ignorant and just said, no, we have disabled toilets, we meet our criteria, and that's strapped upon Avon, one of the biggest tourist place towns in the country. Warwick, my hometown, they've actually got a changing places toilet that went in probably about 7 years ago, but it's in council offices, so it's only really open when the council offices are on,
Really?
not at the weekends when we might be enjoying stuff. But
Yeah.
I've just spent years trying to find places and not having very much success. I was in London last year, and we tried to go to the House of Parliament because I was told there was a changing places there, and under armed guard we actually went to where the guy thought the changing places toilet was, and it wasn't, but it took us an hour and a half to find that with a child who's very upset because he's soiled. Just very difficult. I've picked him out of his chair, put him on a floor, normally on my coat or on a picnic blanket that I used to have with me, because the floors are disgusting, they're dirty, and when I'm down there at that level, we can both smell how dirty the floors are. And that's my precious little boy who has got so many of the complications and has suffered the indignity of being changed in a toilet room floor. But also,
Most people aren't even conscious of this issue, are they?
No, the thing, I wasn't until
No.
I found myself in that situation. And it's one of the things that you're trying your campaign, but we've got other things that we need to campaign about. And we found our own solutions to doing this.
Yeah.
If I've got another person with me, we can sometimes get him out of the wheelchair with two of us. But it's also, where do I put my son's wheelchair when he's on the floor? There's no room for that. So I put his wheelchair outside, hope that no one runs off with it.
Oh, dear.
Because, it's things that you never think you'll be faced with, and I know they're expensive. I know they can't be everywhere, but if in most towns or large shopping centres, when they were actually planning these things, they thought about it, made the place available, and it wouldn't be that difficult to put it in place.
Thank you,
don't
Tracy.
expect them.
Thank you so much for calling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Drew Myerscough in Preston says, I looked after my disabled uncle who had dwarfism and had to take him to the toilet all the time. Out of every disabled toilet we've been in, 80% had water on the floor, were not flushed or had toilet paper everywhere. And we also had to wait for an able-bodied person regularly who was in the loo before us, mainly women with kids. Keith Stewart Clark in Barnsley says the cleanliness and quality of these loos is one thing, but their accessibility is another. The toilets in my area are locked in the evenings after 6 p.m. and on Sundays. What are we supposed to do over the weekend? I've got bowel problems, so I find it quite difficult to head out if there are no toilets nearby. And a lot of parents and grandparents calling on this. Sean Collins in Hastings says, my granddaughter has cerebral palsy, just like Hadley, who we talked about. The disabled toilets are often quite dirty. Part of the problem is that at any time there's a queue, able-bodied people think it's okay to use the disabled toilet. Maybe we need a system where the government issue a pass for disabled people, which allows them to access disabled toilets. BBC Radio 2, The Jeremy Vine Show, 1:30.